Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I want to thank you for joining us as we continue to celebrate all the amazing people who are making Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. And from time to time, we'll get involved in a topic. And as I've said over the past couple of weeks, I've had conversations with friends of mine who have urged me to more regularly share my point of view about the national situation. And this show is not about me, and it's not about what I think. It's more about the people who are making a difference in the trenches of Mississippi. And I want to continue to have a focus on that. But I mentioned that we'll do that from time to time, and I've done it over the course of a couple of shows recently. But I said one of the times that I like to do it, I like to focus on it, is when I have conversations with Pulitzer Prize-winning editor Jim Asher, someone I got to know really well. And I've invited Jim back to the show to converse about the state of media in America today and just catch up with my good friend. Jim, welcome back to my show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to remind people, where you come from, people who have not heard us talk before, how we know each other, and I think they'll begin to really get an appreciation for that. I've got something I want to say to you, too, about how you supported me in my efforts on this show, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But why don't we give people a quick bio on you?
Okay, sure. My career has been spent was all in print journalism. I started working at my hometown newspaper in Utica, New York, moved from Utica to Bridgeport, Connecticut, to Camden, New Jersey, to Philadelphia, to Baltimore, and then finally to Washington, D.C., where I ran the Washington Bureau for the McClatchy Company for about 5-6 years. So it's been rooted in gathering facts, encouraging other people to gather facts. And one of the tragedies of my retirement is that I've been observing this constellation of an infrastructure of journalism sort of vaporizing across the country, where the electronic media has moved from being under Walter Cronkite, a set of facts. When he decided he was going to oppose the war in Vietnam, it reverberated across the country because he had never taken opinion about anything before, to the current state of electronic journalism, where there are a few facts and most of it is opinion. Journalists across the country and local newspapers are struggling to fill their papers or fill their website, produce information for the website because the staffs have become so small. And the major newspapers sometimes do a wonderful job and sometimes don't. So it's not a happy view from my view.
You also had a role with the Associated Press as it relates to the Mueller investigation.
I did. I worked for them for a time to help cover the investigation done by Mueller. That was an interesting time because from the very beginning, it became clear that Mueller was never going to bring charges against Trump because the Justice Department doesn't charge a sitting president. And so there was a lot of strum and drang about what he was gathering and what he was doing. And then in the end, he did nothing. So it was sort of an odd constellation of facts that drove a lot of commentary and didn't drive a lot of change.
Well, we're gonna actually get into the fact that preconceived notions and political leanings and a host of other things have always been something that media, newspaper, all of us have, because human beings are involved, has always been something we work to edit out of the reporting. Because with human beings involved, you're going to have bias and all of that. We're going to get into that, and the state of media today, and what is at times incredibly disgusting. But let me do a quick pause on the conversation, and just say this: that you and I we've reconnected, and it's been great to reconnect with you. From time to time, whether it be here on this show or on my outdoor show, I have focused on shining the light on the process so that people can get as clear a sense of the current situation, the facts as possible, so that where there are wrongs in place, where there are political maneuvering and other special interests involved, that I can shine the light on that so that listeners can fully appreciate what's going on, so they can make some decisions about how they want to respond to what's happening, because the public trust is a really important thing. Now, look, I'm not trying to be a journalist on this show. I'm not. But the very nature of getting involved in issues from time to time, not many, but when I do, I get into them deeply, involves an aspect of journalism to it, because I have to have sources. I have to get information. I have to validate information. I have to corroborate information, and I have to do my research. I have to have my conversations so that I can land somewhere to take a position. And I don't do that haphazardly. And so, Jim, you've watched me do that. You've paid even closer attention than I would have ever urged you to pay attention. And I appreciate that, because what you have been is, if nothing else, you've been sort of this consistent, wise journalist behind the scenes who has sort of urged me on, and at times even congratulated me for, you're, in the way that you do it, that you're proud of me. And I appreciate that. When a Pulitzer Prize-winning editor says that they're proud of you, it means a lot. But having you behind me, urging me on, and even sending me information from time to time that will help me in my journey, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, my friend.
Well, thanks. Those are nice things to hear. Appreciate it. And
yeah,
you can count on me.
Oh, I know that. It's great. It's really good. Listen, as it related to the outdoors issue that I was on, and the work of the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission, and some of their work being behind the scenes, and the work that I did to bring extraordinary light to that. I can't say that my focus brought about change, but I can assure you that change happened to some extent because of my focus. That's the way it's supposed to work, though, isn't it, Jim?
It absolutely is. And, when people know that people of goodwill are looking and watching, then they sort of straighten up, behave better. And when nobody's watching, human nature takes over, and sometimes they do self-interested things.
So, at the core of this, and the lessons that I continue to get are maybe the reminders, because I spent a career understanding the role that, in our case, newspapers played in helping keep democracy viable. The importance of an absolute, as best you can do, unbiased report of the facts, so that people can ultimately decide how they want to choose to go. Those days are over, unfortunately. I mean, we're in a moment now, whether it be the electronic media through cable TV, or whether it be through social media, or whether it be through digital websites, or the amount of sources, it could be through podcast or whatever, you name it. It's almost impossible for people to come to a place where they can feel confident that they're getting the facts. And that's a very troublesome place to be, isn't it, Jim?
It is. And it makes the work of a citizen very difficult, because the access to facts is not magic. I mean, they're all out there, but you really have to work hard to figure out who's got the original facts, who's taken the original facts and manipulated them or selectively picked things. It's not easy, if you've never done this, to know how to go about doing it. And unfortunately, the citizenry of the country have to make really big choices this election, and they have to know why they're making them. And right now, we're in an era where the facts don't have as much standing as they once did, which is
Jim, this is something we talked about a lot when I was a publisher, and Knight Ridder spent a lot of time talking about it, and that is making sure that we were as objective as we possibly could be, because, if you go and look at the readership studies that we would do and the concerns about bias, no matter how hard we worked, there were always concerns about bias. And some of it was, I don't know what a study like this would reveal today, but I think it would be close, or maybe even worse. And that is that you go to your typical newsroom, and maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 15, journalists in the newsroom are actually conservative in terms of their political beliefs. The rest are incredibly liberal. And right off the bat, even in a newsroom that's working to try to be unbiased, we got a problem, or at least something to overcome in terms of the potential perceptions of bias. When we come back over on the other side with Pulitzer Prize-winning editor Jim Asher, we'll continue the conversation and pick it up from right there. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend, Pulitzer Prize-winning editor and journalist Jim Asher, good friend, someone I enjoy joining me. Formerly led the Washington Bureau from McClatchy. He has sort of a global perspective on the news situation, and has a lot of opportunities in his retirement to sort of look at the situation and draw conclusions about it. But Jim, when I was thinking about media bias, I just jotted down a couple of words, and I want to kind of see. I'm going to ask you a question. This is going to be a very all-encompassing kind of question, but I've never asked you in this way. But it'd be interesting to see what your point of view about it is. But when you think about bias, it can lead to things like, but you probably can list 100 items, but I listed 3 here as I was thinking about it. One was negative framing. Okay. It can lead to sensationalism. It can lead to selective reporting, which I think is a really important problem, a really important challenge. So if you think about where we were when newspapers were solid and well funded, and where we are today, in those days, the way it was is we worked hard to try to take bias out. Today, they don't even try to hide it. It's selective and they're not embarrassed about it. It's very out there. And then you add to it the fact that I mentioned before we went to break, where most newsrooms, a lot of newsrooms don't have a conservative person in the newsroom. Okay, so most of them are leaning liberal right off the bat. And then you add the whole Trump thing to the conversation. Some of it fair, some of it entirely unfair. We are in a dynamic media mode as a country in this moment, aren't we?
We are. And so another sort of element of this, which is really insidious, is that because the economics of journalism has so changed, one of the parameters that you gauge success on is the number of clicks you get. And the number of clicks are not driven by how deep you go and how much facts there are in a story. It's generally what the headline says, or what the opinion of the commentator is, and whether that's something that people agree with or disagree with. So you have this additional filter through which journalism is being done. It doesn't encourage it to be better; it encourages it to be worse. It's really quite something, and that translates into so many different ways that people are being misinformed. This current election is one where we're going to have to really think hard as we hear people talk about why they ought to be candidates and why they ought to be elected. But I was intrigued with J.D. Vance's speech the other day, not because of the things he left out, which he left out a lot of, which would have had a whole different reaction, I think, from the crowd if he had dealt with them. But the way he focused his attention on the great reason that most people are disgusted with Washington, and that is the decades in which nothing got done there, and that the collapse of the economy happened and jobs disappeared and went offshore, and drug use accelerated, and people lost jobs and they lost wealth. And all of that created a lot of anger out in the country. It's the reason I think that Trump became president. It's the reason that he could very well become president again. But Vance tied Biden to all of that, irrespective of what Biden would like everybody to believe, that the last 4 years have been pretty useful for the country under his tenure. So, and then you watch the journalism that surrounded that speech, and it didn't get at that issue at all. It got at what he said, but not what he meant.
Yeah, I know.
And in a lot of ways, the requirement of the citizen is getting more and more mandatory, that they become better informed and better understanding of the motives behind what people are telling them. Biden says that Trump had the worst job performance since Hoover. Well, that's true, but it all happened after COVID hit the country and every job disappeared. So, everybody's got a little bit of a manipulation in their conversation. The difference, I think, these days is that some, and Trump was fact-checked on his speech last night, and 16 out of the 19 things he said were not true. Okay, they're just factually not true. That wasn't in the New York Times. It wasn't in the Washington Post this morning.
Yeah. We're just so you know, when by the time this show airs, Biden may have already announced that he is out. We're pre-recording this. Kyle's has a baseball tournament to go to, so we're pre-recording this show. And apologize for that, but still the basis of what we're talking about is still very true. If you were to fact check Biden and Trump, you're going to find them equally misleading a lot. It's just the way, unfortunately, it's the way of politics today. But one of the things that I worry about, one of the things I think about actually, is that it is sort of ironic, really, when you think about it, that here you have Democrats wanting to send a message that Trump is a threat to democracy. I don't think that. I don't think that is the case. That he's a threat to democracy. And at the time when through the Republican National Convention, the Republican Party was so divided at one point, it's actually coming together. And then you have a Democratic Party that was screaming threat to democracy around Trump and Republicans. And then suddenly they are going against the will of the people trying to push Biden out. And he may very well be out by the time this thing airs. It's just the lack of, the amount of irony surrounding the political condition in America today is mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. It's true, and I have an assessment of why that is. I think when the Supreme Court ruled on Citizen United and said that corporations were individuals and had the right to contribute as much as they wanted to political campaigns, that completely changed the forces that made politicians respond to pressure. Before that, and the most you could contribute was $1,000. If a citizen met him on the street and said, you got to do something about X, Y, and Z, the guy listened to you. Now, when the NRA says, or the tobacco companies, or name it and claim it, says you got to do it, and they've given you several millions dollars, there's no chance for the common man to have influence in government. Elon Musk wants to give $45 million a month between now and the election to Donald Trump. Well, he's going to have some influence with Mr. Trump, just as he would with Biden if he were going to give him $45 million.
You know what's interesting, though? If you look at, and all of what you said is very true, if you look at the number of individual donations for Trump, they've risen very substantially. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the number of individual donations to Biden, they have declined. And the big money, if you look at the big money PACs and others that support Biden. In a lot of respect, if you think about not only their political concerns on the Democratic side, but there are also big money concerns on the Democratic side. A lot of the changes that are being that, again, by the time this airs, it may have already happened. Those changes were largely controlled by what big money wanted to happen. Mm-hmm. And gosh, we never really, I mean, that was never what we wanted our democracy to be.
Right. That's absolutely right. And you're right. There is no party that's more better than the other party. You know, when it comes to money, money talks.
Yeah. Hey, but look, Jim, look again. This is not what the show's not about this. But if you look at Americans are generally concerned, and I would say people in the middle and certainly toward the right. Some of my Democrat friends, they're concerned too, but they can't get past Trump to really get to the core of expressing what their real concerns about. But a lot of people are very concerned about the way Biden has handled the border. I mean, who doesn't have concerns about that? Come on now. It makes no sense. And no one's against immigration. We just want legal immigration. So what's happened there, that's real. What's happening as it relates to inflation. And Biden saying that he inherited 9% inflation, which is not true, and all of that, and what he said about job losses and gains, you know, again, true, but you gotta look at the pandemic and really understand how all that played out. The notion of globalist on the economic side against, you know, sort of those who want to have jobs in America. If you're a union, that's an important conversation. So, you know, the dynamics of the moment are so dramatic. And when we come back on the other side, we'll continue that part of the conversation. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We have my friend Jim Asher, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and editor, and someone I really enjoy catching up with. When we went to break, though, we're just talking about the convergence of issues now in our country, and it occurs to me, Jim, as I was thinking about starting this segment, that when you start to lay all these layers on top of each other, you know, it gets so complicated and so hard to understand. The average person is toast in trying to get their head around it. And so when they go to social media and the algorithm does what it does, they get engaged in debates with their friends and their tribe and whatever they do. So much so that they really never are able to get to the nut of it all. It's just so complicated. And then you've got, as some call it, the managerial class in our government that are deeply concerned that big changes are coming. And if he brings like Vivek Ramaswamy into the conversation and others that are very smart folks who have specific observations about the fat that exists in our government, they have a lot to be concerned about if Donald Trump gets elected. And the swirl around that is going to create so many opportunities for great journalism to occur. I'm just not sure where that great journalism is going to be coming from. So we are in a pickle, aren't we, Jim?
We're in a pickle, yeah. We definitely are. And it's not an inconsequential pickle, because the issues that face the country and face individuals are really enormous. You know, you mentioned inflation. You know, I live a relatively comfortable life. I go to the grocery store and I'm stunned by what I have to pay. You know, when eggs they're not this anymore, but when they were $7 a dozen for a dozen eggs, you know, people who struggle every day and have to hold two jobs, or who've had jobs that have had virtually no increase in pay for years, how do they handle that? And then what do they do about it if the government isn't going to do something? You know, yeah. So it's the future doesn't look so hot, and you know, rigorous efforts on the part of the citizenry will help a little bit, but it's not going to help a lot because people aren't going to be able to figure it out. So I don't know.
Yeah, how did we get to a place in America where men can compete against women? And how do we get to a place in America where we got so unfocused on a true meritocracy. I mean, look, diversity and inclusion has always been important. And I think, for example, all the work that Nate Reuter did to help us think about and act on the need to have a newsroom that reflects the community was all really, really important. There are reasons to have these conversations.
And not just newsrooms themselves, but the sourcing of the stories.
Yes.
All had to be diverse. It was really a very forward-looking company.
It really was. It really was.
Doing a lot.
But not to the exclusion of merit, not to the exclusion of hiring just based on those things and not being focused on these other things. But I think what I have come to appreciate. Again, I hope we're not frustrating people, because you and I don't have the answers to this. And oftentimes in a scenario like we're describing, where there's a lot of complexity, it is the news, our ability to trust news reports that could help create clarity that brought about change. That's how democracy works. So it's not our goal to frustrate people, but it is a complicated thing, and it is a situation where the pendulum has always swung, and maybe the pendulum swings will always be radical one way or the other. And before we would expect it to sort of neutralize somewhere in the middle for some period of time, maybe we won't see neutralization in the middle anymore. Maybe the pendulum will just swing from one extreme to the other. That's what we're seeing in Europe. That's what we're seeing in other countries. Big, gigantic pendulum swings. Mm-hmm. Look, searching for, well, that didn't work. And so the electorate says, okay, well, we're going to try this over here. And that, oh God, that didn't work. And we're going to swing back to this over here. Gosh, man, I know the role that we played in helping create some moderation of those extremes, but maybe that's just the way it's going to be from now on.
Well, I'm hoping that someone discovers that there is a business model for all of the people who are craving honorable journalism and fact-filled information. I think there's a way to make money off of that, and to do it. It would be nice if it wasn't all a nonprofit model where 3 or 4 people get together and run a little show in a little town or a big town. It would be nice if it were more broad, sort of reflecting the kind of diversity that we were talking about. But it's not going to be simple.
I would hope so.
I do think out of 310 million people, there ought to be 100 million of them who'd pay a nickel or two to get some facts.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there are a lot of, I had the opportunity to work closely with Alberto Ibargüen when he moved from the Miami Herald and Nuevo Herald to the Knight Foundation. I was involved in the Knight Foundation for many, many years, and I've watched, he's, the initial announcement, I think it was as much as $300 million to focus on local journalism efforts, because Alberto said to me, he said it on the show, he said it to me personally, we stay in touch. He's just such a wise former publisher and someone who cares deeply about journalism. He said that we can't make an impact on the national stage. We just can't. I don't know that he was saying that's lost, but that's a big challenge. We can make an impact locally, because you and I have always, discussed this point that politics is a very, very local thing, and we can make an impact locally, and he's tried to do that. And there are a lot of examples of efforts to do that. But even, one I'll mention, and you and I have discussed before, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but Mississippi Today here in Mississippi has practiced some really good journalism, but they've also at times been incredibly biased. And so so how do you take the bias out of the report of somebody like Mississippi Today? And we got to look at who started Mississippi Today. Well, Andy Lack from MSNBC is the guy that's the brainchild behind that. The guy who brought us Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, the guy that brought us Morning Joe, is the guy who brought Mississippi Today to Mississippi. So, how does a guy with that background give a speech about unbiased reporting and how to support an effort that is unbiased? He can actually be practicing an unbiased report, but the appearance of it can stink.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to bring clarity to local efforts that have leaders that made an effort out of misleading people. There's 100 examples of those things, aren't there?
There are. More troubling to me, though, is that in those organizations that do have codes of ethics, do have a tradition of valuing independence and unbiased journalism, there are too few journalists available to do any serious work. I think I may have mentioned this on one of our earlier conversations, but my hometown newspaper, the one I got my first job at, has 3 reporters and 1 editor. And when I worked there, they had 300 people. 70 or so of them, 70 to 100 were journalists. The rest of them were backshop folks and, advertising people and stuff. There's nothing that they can do, not with 3 reporters. They're basically rewriting press releases, and they're not doing any serious journalism because there isn't time in the day to do it. So
the Sun Herald,
located all across the country.
The Sun Herald here in coastal Mississippi that you know well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had between 50 and 60 people in our newsroom when I left there in 2009. I think they had 3, maybe 4 left in the newsroom. You can't cover a community as complex as coastal Mississippi with that many resources. So the local governments, as you and I have chatted about before, feel very little accountability these days. And there aren't reporters going to the meetings and watching them like a hawk under a magnifying glass to make sure that the public work is not happening outside the public eye. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, that's one of the most important things that when I was discussing the commission on the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, the need to make sure that the work that they were doing was in the public eye. I mean, right off the bat, it's one of the most important things. But man, there's just really not the horsepower to be able to do that. And then you take that to the federal government, man. Holy mackerel. How much of our work is not being done in the public eye? I would say maybe the majority of it, sadly. Hey, when we come back, we'll finish our conversation. Well, we'll never finish the conversation, but we'll finish today's conversation with Jim Asher, a Pulitzer Prize-winning editor and journalist. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. We're talking with Jim Asher, a Pulitzer Prize-winning editor and journalist, a good friend. He knows coastal Mississippi. He helped the Sun Herald after Hurricane Katrina, and he's someone that I really enjoy staying in touch with. Let's close out the discussion with this, that the assassination attempt on Donald Trump brings into focus a lot of stuff. First of all, just the need for journalistic integrity and journalistic focus around the event itself and where the lapses in security may have been. And beyond that, how did those lapses occur and so on? There's tremendous focus on that today. It brought into focus, to what extent is some media complicit in creating an environment that gives a shooter sort of there's never going to be, we'll never know for sure, but the shooter obviously has his own mental framework. But how did we tap into whatever that was inside of him that made him go do that? So that's important. We've got to focus on that. But it really helps us understand to what extent is the coverage anti-Trump, and to some extent, whatever Trump has tapped into, and you alluded to that just a second ago, that has caused 50% or more of Americans to sort of say his points are right. Now, we may not like the way he says it. He might have given a 90-minute speech, and we may not have liked that. He might have got off the teleprompter, and we may not have liked that. But at the bottom of when you sum it all up, we need change in America, and I'm attaching the change. And to what extent does the media completely lose that reality? And all of that swirls around the attempted assassination. How much do you think about this since that terrible event occurred?
Well, well, I look at the news every day. I subscribe to like 7 newspapers, and I'm on Twitter, and I'm doing Instagram, and I'm constantly doing. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but there I am, and the migration away from traditional sourcing to the more informational kind of electronic social media stuff has really changed how people look at the world. So I don't know if you could say that journalism helped produce the assassin, but social media and the information machine, which has replaced journalism, has helped produce the assassin by giving him and every other crazy who wants to pick up a gun and do something the excuse that it's a reasonable choice to make.
Yeah,
that's something that you get every day on the internet.
Yeah.
You can't avoid it. It's there all the time. And if you want it, you can be overwhelmed by it.
And you look at X, man, the numbers on X, they're higher than they've ever been. X is going to be the primary source of news and information around the world from this point forward, Jim.
Absolutely.
That's the reality. That is where we are. Look, all these conspiracy theories are flying, and so clearly those who are investigating the event will have to look at all the potential scenarios. But for example, if there were a managerial class that wanted to take him out inside government, if that were the case, maybe the way they could do it didn't have their fingerprints on it would be to create vulnerabilities in the security. Okay. But see, these are the kind of things that journalistic organizations think about. They think about, okay, hey, there was a weakness in this security on that day that a crazy person filled. But let's go back and look at other events where there are other rooftops that weren't covered, where there are other opportunities to do this before. See, before we get done, Jim, I'm confident that we will have that level of data coming out of the research that's happening here, whether it be from governmental investigations through the FBI and otherwise, or maybe it's through journalistic efforts. But we're going to get more clarity about the shooter, the situation, the vulnerability. That's the way it's supposed to work, though, isn't it?
It is. And I suspect we'll know more. Whether we'll be satisfied with how much we know, that's not clear. When you have a one person dead on the floor, it's not easy to figure out what was on his mind and who influenced him. I was intrigued, speaking of conspiracies, I was intrigued with the fact that he was doing most of his communication with the encrypted app called WhatsApp. And okay, so who's he talking to?
Yeah.
He's not talking to his mom and dad because he's not doing that on WhatsApp. What's the reason for it? So maybe there's more to it than it appears right now, but we'll find out, I'm sure. I don't know how happy I'll be with it, but we'll find out.
I agree with you. There are just too many weaknesses in the whole thing that makes you wonder about it, and because we may never get inside the encrypted aspect of some of the conversations, we may never know for sure. And when there is a void in information, that it tends to get filled by misinformation and fake news and so on, and it's not good. And that's the world we're in today. And that's why we need journalism to help try to cut through some of that. Jim, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed it.
This has been Jim Asher. We'll have him back. I know we'll have him back again and again and again, and we'll continue these conversations. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.